Right, quickly, I just want to talk about the basic shotting patterns that I use for all of my commercial fishing. What I see a lot during my coaching sessions is all sorts of fancy different ways of shotting, all sorts of weird and wonderful different shotting patterns that, in all honesty, they don't benefit to what you're trying to achieve. What I like to do is keep things very, very simple and use just 3 different shotting patterns. This is when fishing in decent depth of water, not fishing down the edge or shallow. This is me open water or deep water snake lake type shotting. But the ways I choose to shot my rig in relation to how I introduce my bait. It's very, very important to present my bait in the correct way, depending on how I'm feeding it. So what I'm going to run through is the 3 different rigs I use to cover 99% of my fishing. Firstly, and this is probably the most regular rig that I use during the winter, is my nice stable, sort of a snake lake rig whenever I'm fishing on a slope. Yes, it's my stable rig because I'm fishing with nice big shot down the bottom of it. So it means what I'm going to try and achieve with this is a tiny pile of bait on that far slope, and I'm going to have a rig that's nice and stable with big shot. So in this case, it's big number 8 shot all the way through the bottom third to bottom half of my rig. That's going to keep my bait in a tight area, but it's going to help keep it right where I want it on that slope. I've also got it spread out instead of a solid bulk. This is really important when I'm fishing on a slope because I want my rig to curl into the slope. You often find that you're pushing your rig right into the far bank bushes or whatever else. So you want your bait almost closer to you, so it's curling all the way down that slope. If I were to have a solid bulk, I'd actually have a pivot point in my rig and it wouldn't make it quite as direct, so I wouldn't see bites as good. I'll say this is my basic rig, nice stable rig, in that case the 4x16s in 4.5 foot. That's really going to keep that bait right over that tight pile where I want it to be. So the second rig that I'd use is just very, very similar, but this is for fishing whenever I'm in open water or on a flat bottom, possibly down the middle. And this, I'm trying to achieve exactly the same thing. I'm trying to feed a tiny pile of bait and sit over the top of it, but I simply have a nice big positive, same again, 4x16s float, and I've got a bulk right on top of my hook length. There's no point whatsoever in nice fancy falling through the water rigs when that's not the type of presentation I'm trying to achieve. I just want to sit there, create the method feeder on the bottom effect with a little pile of bait with my bait over the top of it, sit and wait for a fish to come and fall for the trap. So by having a nice bulk, that achieves the perfect form of presentation for me when I'm trying to feed in that way. What I would like to touch on is that it's also really important to choose the right baits to feed in those ways. Yeah, when I'm trying to create a tiny pile on the bottom, the last thing I want to choose is a really light bait that's going to get wafted all over the place. So I wouldn't choose baits like meat or maggots, because it's very difficult to get them to fall in a tight pile when you're feeding them in a depth of water in 3 foot plus. So by choosing baits like hard pellets, worms, balls and micros, it allows me to create a very tight pile. So they work perfectly with these sort of rigs. The last rig, and this is probably the rig I use most often during the summer months, it's a little bit windy, is what I like to refer to as my girly rig. This is probably my favourite rig, and this wins me more matches than any other rig I've ever had. And this is simply number 11 spread all the way through a nice rig, all the way through the whole rig with a nice 4x12s float or 4x10s float depending on the depth, just to achieve a perfectly slow fall or a natural fall through the water that gives me the chance of catching fish both through the water and on the bottom. This is a rig that I'll choose any time I'm loose feeding with my catapult. So it gives me the best of both worlds. I catch some fish shallow and I catch some fish on the deck, all by using the same rig, laying in at the right times and presenting my bait in a nice natural way. What it isn't any good for is any stability. So it's very likely to move about in the water with any poor conditions. So it'd be no good for feeding in the other ways as I do with my other rig. But so as a rule, anytime I'm feeding nice light baits, again, such as maybe hard pellets with a catapult, maybe I'm loose feeding maggots on my short line or even with a catapult, this is the rig I'm always going to choose because it'll present my bait in the same way that I'm feeding my loose feed across the canal onto an open water, whatever I'm doing. So basically, that covers all my fishing, keeps things nice and simple, and I always feel I'm presenting my bait in the right way.